Well, welcome everybody. This is the February meeting of the NWSOFA Fiscal and Economics group. It's been an interesting year so far. Just wanted a couple of announcements. Upcoming later this month down at the University of Chicago, Paul Krugman is going to be in town for a free discussion with Austin Goolsbee, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. So if you're connected with me on Facebook, or go look on my Facebook page, you'll see I posted the link. Otherwise, it's the University of Chicago Institute of Politics that has the link.
Is that something we should promote to our membership?
I will go ahead and, when I send out the email follow-up for this meeting, I will go ahead and mention it along with the link to tonight's presentation, along with the video that Dave is going to use.
And that's February 26th, huh?
Yes, February 26th. It's a Wednesday, 5:30 to 6:45, down on 59th Street. As I said, it's February. This group is about basically trying to get an understanding of the facts so that our members understand the facts and they can share those facts with the people they interact with in person, on Facebook, comment sections on the New York Times, however you interact with other people. So, jobs. As you can see, jobs have been going up since February of 2010. The hiccup there was, a blip in May for the 2010 census, and they laid off people during the summer after the hard push of a couple of months of follow-up census. Along those lines, if anybody is looking for a little bit of work, they're hiring people to do that follow-up work in Chicago at something like $29.50 an hour. So a little over minimum wage.
About twice, isn't it?
What?
That's about twice minimum wage, isn't it?
Well over twice.
I thought it was 15. Is it 10?
It's not 15.
No. They wanted to make it 15.
Well, which minimum wage?
Well, you've got the federal minimum wage, which is still 7.25. You've got the state minimum wage, which may be up to 10. I think Chicago's is up to 13.
13? Okay.
In any case, the reason I mentioned that hiccup in 2010 is we may see a similar hiccup in 2020, where as we get into the late summer, early fall, we see very low job creation or perhaps negative job creation on an overall basis as we head towards the election, because we're going to be hiring a bunch of census workers. I think we do it better in another slide, is that the total number of jobs here is actually slightly lower than it was last month, because the Bureau of Labor Statistics had gone in and periodically they do the jobs from the establishment survey, which is they survey a bunch of companies that they know about and get information back from them, and then they estimate for companies that have been created in the month and for companies that died within the month, because there's a lot of both every month. And then periodically, after the end of a year, after the end of a period, they take tax filings for unemployment benefits, and those are the hard count of how many payroll jobs there were, because you have to file unemployment insurance for every payroll job. But that's not an instantaneous thing every month. Those are filed, I think, quarterly, after the fact, so it takes a while for that information to flow through. And so we've known since last summer that there was going to be an adjustment due to that checking, and that adjustment occurred with the most recent data. And we can see here the revisions on a monthly basis, where the blue represents the data before the revision, and the brown, orange, whatever, represents after the revision. So where it looked before like we had a big bump in 2018, now there's not so much of a big bump in 2018.
Oh, okay.
So you've got job creation during the last 36 months of Obama versus Trump's first 36 months. And it's basically 1.5 million more jobs were created under Obama's 36 months, or about 500,000 more jobs a year, which is pretty significant.
Will they ever come together?
They who?
The number of jobs being created, the Trump number of jobs versus Obama as they go up from 36 to 37 to
48.
48, maybe, that's what it's
Won't be before the election, let's put it that way, it's probably 2 years out.
It's, my guess is no, they wouldn't, but, you know, I mean, if Trump ever gets his 4% to 6% real GDP growth and his phenomenal, actually booming job growth, it could happen. You should see a bit of a closure on this over the next few months. As I say, the April-May census hiring. And then that closure goes away in the fall. So recent job creation is about at the 6-7 year average since the end of the Great Recession. Unemployment rates are good. They, eked up a little bit, but essentially stayed low. The U3 unemployment rate is at 3.6% after being down at 3.5% last month, but that's still close to a 50-year low and a sign of a pretty good economy. The U6 unemployment rate, which is the U3 includes people who look for a job in the last month and don't have a job and are looking. The U6 includes people who have looked for a job in the last year and are unemployed. And it also includes the people who are working part-time who want full-time employment. Now, most people who are working part-time want part-time employment. The last time I looked, there were around 27 million people working part-time, and roughly 5 million of them wanted full-time employment. It might be 4.5 million. That number got as high as 9 million during the recession, but it's come back down. The people who work in part-time who want part-time employment include students, parents who don't want to work full-time, senior citizens who want to stay in the job market and make a little bit of money, but no longer want to work full-time. And so there's a lot of people, the majority of people working part-time want part-time employment. But the U6 rate is set a record last month. Prior to this, the record was 6.8%. Now, the U3 rate, obviously, the all-time record's 2.5%. So we're not anywhere close to the all-time record on the U3 unemployment rate. Now, the unemployment rate hit 10% during the Great Recession and the downturn. Since then, it's come down all the way to 3.6%. It came down from 10 to 4.7% or 5.3% while Obama was president. It's come down another 1.1% since Trump took office. Again, the 3.6% is a good number. It indicates a healthy economy, but I don't give Trump a whole lot of credit for that drop. Especially since job growth is slower now than it was. Inflation?
Carl, isn't there a little bit of a question there though, that the number of companies that are looking for workers has really grown, added 2 million, looking for 2 million additional jobs that are now greater than the unemployment level? Is that indicating that we're out of workers, basically?
Well, yes and no, because obviously, if you remember when President Trump ran for office, he used the employment to population ratio and said the unemployment rate was really up in the 40% category. And what that means is that there's a large pool of people who might come into the workforce if they, are sufficiently incentivized to do so. I suspect that the $29.50 an hour census jobs are going to pull some people into the workforce who hadn't really been looking. But hey, what the heck, let's work part-time for a couple of months at a pretty decent rate. And things like that. Again, what you're talking about is the unemployment on the U3 rate, which is the people who've actively looked for a job in the prior month. But the people who are available to work include all the people in that U6 rate plus a fair number of other people that haven't actively worked, but looked for work, but if the job opportunities show up, they will. Yeah, Paul.
There seems to be a claim that many things in the economy are cyclic.
Are what?
Are cyclic. Have good times and bad times, if you will, stuff like that. Politicians like to take credit when it's good. They like to blame their predecessors or the other party somehow when it's bad. What kind of unemployment would we expect to happen, had Obama not been a Democrat, but had he been a Republican? Would he still, using Republican policies, what kind of that growth would he probably have seen there? I guess what I'm trying to tease out is how much of that is a normal recovery that is happening because of the way the economy works, and how much of it is really due to good actions of Obama and bad actions of Trump.
Well,
I get where I'm going.
Okay, most people think that a big part of the recovery and the avoidance of a severe downturn and another Great Depression was Keynesian fiscal stimulus.
Which started to happen under Bush, actually, did it not?
A little bit, yeah, it did happen. And the big deficit year was Bush's last budget year, which was fiscal year 2009, which started on October 1st of 2008, 4 months before President Obama took office. So that the big deficit year was was a President Bush budget year. Now, with a Democrat in the White House, the Republicans said, cut spending, cut spending, cut spending. And so they were going against Keynesian fiscal stimulus. Obviously, with a Republican in the White House,
Spend money like crazy.
They've changed their position.
they're now
Democrats.
Well, no. They're going. I don't know what you call this, neo-Keynesian, quasi-Keynesian. Yeah. Keynes said when the economy is good, you shouldn't run big deficits. This is when you should be paying down the debt that you ran up during the bad times. And the Republicans say, no, let's continue to stimulate the economy, even while we're setting near record unemployment, 50-year lows for unemployment. We're going up. We had a budget deficit in the last fiscal year that was $984 billion, almost $1 trillion. And the expectation is that the current fiscal year and the subsequent fiscal years are all going to have budget deficits over $1 trillion. Compared to, the last budget year was, I think, $383 billion higher than if they'd kept Obama's policy.
Yeah.
Now, it's certainly true that when a president takes office, he's not much responsible for what happens in the economy at the start. Again, you're inheriting your predecessor's budget, which runs through September. So there's a lot of people that would argue that when you judge presidents, you should judge them with a lag versus when they take office. That said, and there's a school of thought that says the presidents have absolutely no influence, and it's,
And I was playing to that a little bit with that question.
and it's blind luck or coincidence that the economy performs a heck of a lot better when a Democrat's in the White House versus a Republican. And the empirical data shows that strongly. Trump wants to go ahead and not only take credit from day one of taking office, he wants to take credit for everything that happened 2 to 3 months before he took office. Because there was some good stuff happening, and, well, why not try and take credit? Anyhow, inflation.
Can I speak a little bit to that?
Yeah.
So the federal government put $700 billion into the economy, pretty much direct. About half of it actually direct. The rest of it was like tax savings. You might have seen your paycheck go up because he actually did not put into Social Security for a while. The Fed put $3 trillion into the economy. So that's what it actually took, was $3 trillion. If you want to see the difference, you can still look at Europe, where they're still suffering from a lack of stimulus during that time, and their economy is still suffering for it. So, it does matter what the attitudes are. What the Republicans decide to spend money on probably would not have stimulated the economy as much. Because a direct payment where that money goes to eyeglass places, Walmart, Target, goods and services that have to get bought, does more for the economy than a stimulus that just drops into someone's bank account.
And especially with Republican stimulus being weighted towards top earners who don't necessarily spend it.
Yeah.
Or just stimulates the stock market.
It's actually an interesting case, right? Because the worldwide economy has, since 2008, has dumped $30 trillion into the economy. And it's fascinating that we haven't seen any inflation.
We're not only not no inflation, we're running negative interest rates over most of Europe.
Yeah. So
Zero in Japan.
it's actually, sorry, it's 13 trillion.
Zero in Japan versus what, 2000?
Yeah. To give an example of a Republican president who had a recession early in his office, and tried to, had jobs growers, things like that, but tried to do it within the concept of a balanced budget, was Herbert Hoover. And if you look at what happened under Hoover and how long it took before we started to see any growth in the economy after 4 straight years of major GDP shrinkage, double-digit real GDP shrinkage. You see what happens if you adopt can happen if you adopt an austerity approach in a big recession like that. It was only once FDR took office that we started to see growth in the economy.
We didn't see it right away there, as I recall either. It was delayed for.
It was within a year that you were seeing, it was within his first year. I don't know whether it was, I mean, I don't know there's 33, but you certainly had real GDP growth in 34. You continue to have real GDP growth until they decided to try and balance the budget early back in 37, 38. And so you had another recession then before you then had major deficit spending to prepare for the war. And that primed the economy even further with, fiscal stimulus. Anyhow, the inflation has been pretty moderate. You can see the all items, which includes food and energy, is wildly a function of gas prices. You see that big spike in inflation back in the middle of 2008, when my brother said, let's go on a Route 66 road trip. And gas prices were over $4 a gallon in Chicago and California, and high everywhere in between. And you can see where gas prices dropped after that. And that's mainly what drives the higher and lower blue line, with the red line being excluding food and energy. The other thing I read recently, and is that if you look back over the last, I forget whether it's 20, 30, 40 years, goods inflation has been close to zero. Inflation has been driven by services, including rent, education, healthcare, things like that. But goods inflation has been close to zero. And if you think about what you used to pay for a color TV back in the 80s or 90s, or an room air conditioner, or a cell phone,
Computer.
a computer, you can see that there's a lot of goods that are cheaper now than they were before. This is inflation by category. I'll let you look at it all on your own. Real wage growth. Again, we've had real wage growth under Trump, but not exceptionally high. It's not a booming economy. If you look at the first 35 months under Trump, and this is because it's 35 rather than 36 because we're still short inflation data for January? Or?
You stole it from the New York Times, just one of the little versions.
Okay, all right. I'm guessing it's because they didn't have the inflation data at that point. We may still know. Inflation gets reported later than jobs in a month. But you've got Trump's, real wage growth at 0.8% versus the prior 35 months at 1.3% under Obama. So this is not from a job growth standpoint, from a wage growth standpoint, the economy is not booming. It's good, don't get me wrong. I like being on the 36-yard line, the 3.6% unemployment, but it's not a booming economy reflecting things that have gone great under Trump. Looking at GDP growth, 2019 I think came in at, was projected to come in at 2.2. I think it actually came in at, the first estimate is 2.3, but it's still subject to a couple of revisions. So, and the last 3 quarters in 2019 were 2%, 2.1%, and 2.1%. If you recall, candidate Trump promised us 4% growth and didn't see any reason why we couldn't go to 5 or 6%. And he repeated that in the fall of 2017, late 2017, when he was pushing for the tax bill, that if we got the tax bill, we were going to get the 4% growth. Other people in the administration tried to temper down expectations and said 3%, but Trump never said anything less than 3.5%, and almost always said 4%. Yeah, Bill.
So, at the State of the Union, Trump said, greatest economy ever. Never had so many jobs growth, ever. He said manufacturing is booming. New plants, unbelievable. I think he had a number like 1,400 or something came in. I read an article the other day on several of those subjects, but one that caught me off guard was from the manufacturing, one of the manufacturing organizations that I belong to, that was bemoaning the fact that they have been in recession for the last 4 months. Are these things that are commonly known out there, or is that just an industry spokesman that's piping off?
Well, let's take a look, quick diversion here, hopefully, quick. Let's look at manufacturing growth.
He gets to this far too easily. He gets to this far too easily.
Yeah.
Takes me hours.
And what you see is that there was an uptick in there was manufacturing growth throughout much of the Obama years, once we got past the downturn of the Great Recession. We plateaued during 2016. Then there was good growth in manufacturing in 2017 and 2018, and it's been relatively flat since the beginning of 2019.
So it's not going down, it's not going up, it's just flat.
Basically, yeah.
But it didn't seem that the last 2 months were almost identical at a negative 12.5, 12,500. But I don't know what the quarter is measured on.
And, I mean, in terms of jobs, depending on what he said, most jobs ever, certainly. I mean, if you go back to slide 1 or whatever of the data, I can probably get back to it here easier.
We've been setting records every month for most jobs ever since May 2014.
Right.
Every month.
And the workforce is still growing, right?
Yeah.
Totally.
And, I mean, if you go forever, we'll go back a few years to get a few data points. I guess this data set goes back to 39. But you can see we had a peak around 2000 and then a drop of about 3 million jobs early in the Bush years for what was not really thought of as a major recession, but it was one of the biggest job losses ever. Then we had a pre-recession peak in 2007 of employment. But as Dave said, since May of 2014, we've been setting records every month. So it's true, we've been setting records every month. Manufacturing employment, you can see that it grew post-World War, well, during World War II it grew, because we started in 39. It dropped after the war, then it climbed back up, set a peak in 79, and has been, trending down since 79. A serious drop both in the early 2000s and then during the Great Recession, with a recovery since then. Not counting Obama, where he had a large part of this drop at the beginning of his term, every Democratic president has seen saw growth in manufacturing employment every Republican president saw a drop in manufacturing employment. But, like I say, the Obama, because of this severe drop, we've been growing since 2010, but we've been growing manufacturing, but it didn't overcome. It was still, we added about 900,000 jobs from the low to when he left office, but he was still down about 100,000 because of the drop. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month when he took office. So. Yeah, probability of recession, treasury spread. Right now they're saying a 25% chance of a recession by, next year. On the one hand, I don't get too excited about the treasury spread. If it got worse for an extended period of time, I'd be more concerned about it than I do with this. But there's some other things going on in the economy worldwide that indicate that we may have some, slower growth, if not a recession. There's all kinds of things going on. The disruption due to the coronavirus. Japanese growth in the fourth quarter was -6%. China's growth is slowing to, I think, a +6% in the fourth quarter. Brexit is going to cause disruption for European growth, including Great Britain. And so there's lots of things. Now, the US, Mexico, Canada agreement may provide a little bit more stability there than we've had. I still want to see whether I can't get somebody in Congress to go ahead and actually do a comparison of what's in the USMCA versus what was in the TPP. Did we really gain anything by waiting 3 years? Other than, not having that agreement with 9 more countries.
Apparently there was a big cut and paste out of the TPP into the US, what is it, the UCA?
USMCA.
USMCA, there was a big cut and paste of text out of there.
It's certainly, yeah. So do I expect to see a recession in 2020? Do I expect to see a recognition of a recession before the election? No. Even if we were to enter a recession in mid-2020, it takes the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, a whole lot of time to recognize and label something a recession. So if you take the recession that started in December of 2007, it wasn't labeled a recession until after the 2008 election. So again, unless we were already in a recession, we're not going to see anything labeled a recession before the November election. But what I do expect to see is some slowdowns. I expect to see real GDP growth staying around 2%. We may have, again, first quarter of last year, we were at 3.1%. We may have an outlying quarter on the upside like that. We may have an outlying quarter on the downside at 1.1%. I don't know, but I expect real GDP growth somewhere in the 1.5% to 2.5% range between now and the election. I expect to see job growth to continue to be lower than it has been in the Obama years, except for the census. In 2010, the BLS ran some numbers of what do the jobs look like if you exclude the census workers to try and smooth that out. I suspect that the Trump administration will go ahead and leave the census numbers in while we're adding those workers, but then they'll smooth them out and take them out when we start to lay them off. Because they're not going to want to have what looks to be very low job growth in the months right before the election, when people are making up their mind. Talked a little bit about GDP. Obama's best year was 2.9%. Trump's best year was 2.9% in the calendar years, as calculated by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is a sort of bizarre way they do that calculation, but it's consistent. It's the best argument for it. The thing to remember about these is that, to a great extent, it's really mid-year to mid-year. So the 2017 number is more an Obama year than a Trump year. Just like the 2009 number, which was negative, was much more of a Bush year than an Obama year. And that's why the annual numbers, especially on that transition, are misleading at best. And a lot of people who talk about Obama numbers include 2009 and not 2017 in the Obama calculation. If you go back and look at from the first quarter of 2009 when Obama took office to the first quarter of 2017 when he left office, the real GDP growth rate was 2.1%. If you look at the Bush years, again, first quarter 2001 to first quarter 2009, it was 1.7%. The Clinton years, 3.7%. The Bush 41 years, 2.0%. Reagan and Carter were both at 3.4%, and that's the best. That's as far as I can go back out of memory. Because then you get into these partial terms with Nixon and Ford and Kennedy and Johnson.
It's interesting looking at that, how 13, 14, and 15, and then 16, 17, and 18 look almost the same. 1816, 2524, 2929, they're almost the same.
Yeah. Again, a 12-quarter comparison. I would again put the first quarter of 2017 in the Obama column. Again, he takes, Trump took office January 20th, and the data is basically mid-February data. So, but we had some very good quarters under Obama, 5.5%, 5% growth. The highest quarters under Trump, as currently calculated, are 3.5% growth. You'll probably recall that at the time, the second quarter of 2018 was reported as 4.1% growth, but last summer, Trump's Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Commerce Department went back and pulled in additional data that they had available, and they revised that number down. And here's where, changes in federal spending as a percent of GDP, I think that's what I'm looking at here. We were dropping spending as a percent of GDP during 2011, 2012, 2013, and I'm surprised that 2010 is negative, but it's positive, because if you look at spending, nominal spending, we had nominal spending cuts in fiscal years 2010, 2012, and 2013. The first cuts in nominal spending since fiscal year 65.
When the government is adding to the deficit, you'll see a positive blue line. When the government is taking away from the deficit, you usually see a negative blue line. The point here is that in those last 3 years under Obama, 2014, 15, and 16, federal government spending didn't add anything on average to GDP, but it added the 0.2 there for Trump, and that's the difference between Obama and Trump. If you look at the page before, 2.3 and 2.5, and then you go to the next one, that's the difference right there.
Yeah, Keynesian fiscal stimulus will go ahead and give you a little bit of a boost.
So the magic of Trumponomics is deficit.
Keynesian fiscal stimulus.
It is. He's a genius.
And if you want to get into what caused the most recent quarter versus averages, was a decline in exports, I think, or decline in imports. Decline in imports.
Very weird number.
Yeah. And again, I don't know whether that was rushing to buy up a bunch of stuff before China put huge tariffs on it or what it was that we were looking at. Again, contribution to GDP, different components. Feel free to take a look at this at your leisure. All of you should have gotten this. If not, there's a link to this on the RSVP link. Budget deficit. 69 rolled off. 69 was the surplus year, the last Johnson budget year. And just for minuscule facts, back in 69, the budget years ran from July through June. It wasn't until fiscal year 77 that they switched over to the October to September fiscal year. So in the old days, when presidents took office in March and the fiscal year started in July, they had basically no impact, not only on the fiscal year that they inherited, but the next one they essentially inherited. But you see the big deficits during the Reagan recession years in the early 80s, early to mid 80s, and then surpluses at the end of the 90s, 2000s, then big deficits. Again, 2009 was Bush's last budget year. The deficit went down in the Obama years, fiscal year 2010, 2011, 2012. That's why I was surprised about the positive number on the prior graph for 2010. May well be right, it's counterintuitive.
It is, you're right.
And again, projected, this is based on an analysis from the Congressional Budget Office that came out last month, projecting that the deficit is going to continue to grow. A big thing, if you go back and look at the numbers, is that federal spending was, with the end of the Cold War, defense spending went down. Military spending went down. But it was always expected that spending would go up as the baby boomers retired, because there was going to be big spending on Social Security, Medicare, and senior citizen Medicaid for nursing homes, et cetera. And so, when people 5, 6, 7 years ago were talking about how the historical spending was X, well, the projected future spending was always going to be X plus 2% because of the retirement of the baby boomers and the huge increase in the senior citizen population. And so that's where we're seeing that we may be getting back to a historical revenue line, but because of the senior citizens, the projected outlays are going to go up, and this isn't any major new programs. These are programs from the 30s and the 60s. And, demographics of society, of a large number of senior citizens. We can either live with the, big deficits or try and do something about it. And those are part of the presidential debate this year. Spending outlays, Social Security, I think I looked at it once different years, but from about the early 80s to the late 90s, early 2000s, Social Security was basically flat. At probably around that 4.4% of GDP. The big things were that the major healthcare programs, Medicare and Medicaid, went up substantially. Especially Medicare had grown by about 2% of GDP in that time frame. And other things have been relatively flat. Defense, as I talked about, was a huge percent of the budget, especially in 1970. we're still fighting the Vietnam War, as well as the Cold War. The other numbers are all post-Cold War numbers. Non-defense discretionary has been shrinking, not increasing. Interest goes up and down. It's actually fairly low at the moment, despite the large amount of debt, because of the low interest rates. The expectation is that interest rates will go up, and the amount of debt will go up, causing the interest expense to go up. Revenues, you see a big drop between 95 and 2020 on corporate income taxes. They've gone from 3.1% to 1.1% of GDP. Again, what's projected to change? Social Security and major healthcare programs are the big increases due to, as we talked about, 10,000 baby boomers a day turning 65. And demographics is pushing that. I mean, when Mitch McConnell says that the major increase in spending is due to, Social Security and Medicare, he's right, but those were expected and have been predicted for decades. And if he didn't account for that when he was doing his tax cuts, he's an idiot, but then, or something. But they're predicting that other mandatory spending and discretionary spending are going to be losing out as a percentage of GDP. And interest will go up. Individual income taxes. If the provisions in the 2017 Tax Act that are scheduled to end at the end of calendar year 2025 actually expire, which is what these was all calculated on, then the individual income tax as a percent of GDP will go up between 2020 and 2030. But we all remember that the Bush tax cuts were temporary.
80% of the dollar value was extended.
To today, yes. So this graphic showing 18% may well be optimistic because of the expectation that we're going to get the 1.4% blip up in 2026. That will depend upon what Congress and the then president do. Federal debt went up during World War II, came down, it's gone up and down, and it's projected to go up. And depending upon what policies we have, it's going to go up like this. It may go up more than this. It may go up less than this. These are the size of the policy changes that would be needed to maintain or reduce the debt levels. As a percent of GDP, not in absolute dollars. And it would take a $400 billion a year reduction in the deficit to hold us at the 78%, and a $630 billion a year reduction in the deficit to bring us down to the 42%. Whether, I'm not optimistic that we're going to see anything like those numbers. Although, Trump claimed he was going to get there with his fiscal year 2021 budget, which is based upon, what, 4% growth?
The only way he retires that debt is if he has the Fed print the money and pay it off. He'll not do it through raising taxes or cutting spending.
Okay.
There's no room for it.
All right. Other questions on this? It looks like a logical time. Otherwise, you take a break. Run briefly.